San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, who voted recently to support the NRA legislation. That vote was taken of that board of 17-6 in favor of adopting a resolution of support. However, that did not prohibit or prevent individual cities within the organization from opposing or supporting the legislation. Back last week, staff submitted some areas of concern to the Congresswoman's office. And by the way, the NRA legislation was proposed by Congresswoman Judy Chu. Staff did submit areas with the city attorney's also input, also areas of concern that we had on the legislation. What the legislation is proposed to do is to conserve, protect, and enhance for the future benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations the ecological, scenic, wildlife, recreational, cultural, historical, natural, educational, and scientific resources of the recreation area. Also to provide environmentally responsible, well-managed recreational opportunities within the recreation area, to provide expanded educational and interpretive services to increase the public's understanding and appreciation of the natural and cultural resources of the area, facilitate cooperative management of these lands, and to preserve the discretion of all persons, entities, and local government agencies and activities related to integrated water management, flood protection, water conservation, water quality, water rights, water supply, public roads and bridges, and utilities affecting the area. From staff's perspective, we see potential benefits in that Monrovia would be able to maintain the right to evaluate impacts on resources and close trails seasonally or eliminate programs as needed, as defined in the resource management plan. There's possible future funding for projects as described in the fiscal impact. However, there are no funds directly associated with this legislation, and as far as we were able to tell, other national recreation areas in the country have not yet been funded with any federal additional fundings. The stated purpose of the NRA is consistent with the purpose of the Hillside Wilderness Preserve area and the Resource Management Plan. Both focus on conservation and protection of natural resources as well as enhancement of passive recreation. Increased outreach by the National Recreation Area could result in tourism dollars to local restaurants, gas stations, and convenience stores, and the NRA could further cooperative management of resources. Alternatively, our concerns are there is no guarantee that a representative from Monrovia could be placed in the partnership or advisory council. Local control and the ability for local governments that own and manage land within the proposed NRA will still be able to continue to manage those lands according to their own policies and regulations. However, the Hillside Wilderness Preserve Resource Management Plan may not be incorporated under the local control sections of the proposed legislation. Also, there is no opting out of the legislation. There's also uncertainty of protection to existing unpaved fire roads, structures like Canyon Park Cabin, or existing hiking trails. The Visitor Services Plan may increase activity in the Hillside Wilderness Preserve, impacting residential areas near the access points, and there's a possibility of increased impact to Monrovia lands that may result in increased cost of enforcement, cleanup, and resource protection. There's a lot of other information presented in the packet. One of the things that I again would say is that the proposed legislation is not to usurp local control and land use decisions within our own jurisdiction or ownership. So, there's a lot of controversy over the bill, and at this point, staff is not prepared to make a recommendation in favor or against, but was looking for council direction in this matter. If you have any questions, we'll try to answer.
Questions of staff? I have just a couple, Mr. Delatch. On your points that you made that you had of concerns, you said one of the concerns is that the resource management plan may not be incorporated under the local control section of the proposed legislation, and there's no opting out portion in the legislation. Under page 9 and 10, section 4, there's some verbiage that I think I want to ask why you feel this does not cover those, specifically with regard to the incorporation of the resource, the hillside or the wilderness preserve resource management plan. Under page 9, section 4D2E, it says after any duly adopted, or nothing in this section shall alter any duly adopted land use regulation, approved land use plan, or any other regulatory authority of any state or local agency or tribal government. So I'm wondering, why do you feel that does not cover that point?
Well, I think there are two concerns that are expressed in our letter. I don't think the issue is whether the plans that are proposed in the legislation would purport to alter our general plan or our municipal code. I mean, that's not within the authority of the federal government to do. So that's not really the issue. Mm-hmm. Elsewhere in the statute, and I can go through and find the citations if you'd like, there are references to decisions being made by these two other organizations or by the secretaries for to make decisions that are quote unquote consistent with local plans. And in our world, in the local government world, you would make that decision as to what's consistent with your plan and what's not. This bill allows either the secretary or the two entities that it creates to make that determination of whether a certain federal action is consistent with our general plan, our hillside plan, our local plans. And the concern is, especially if we don't have direct representation on the two boards, is that somebody else is going to be making a decision about whether a particular action is consistent with your Monrovia plan. And that sort of sets the decision-making process that we're used to on its head, because decisions about whether things are consistent with your general plan are made by you as the city council, not by another entity that doesn't have that same level of accountability. So our concern is that what you think is consistent with your plan, or what the voters think is consistent with the plan that they adopted, may be entirely different from what one of the secretaries thinks is consistent with the plan.
But even though, I mean, I'm not sure I agree with you on that, but there's also many points in here where in the legislation, where it says nothing in this act shall authorize the secretary to take any action that would affect the land use not owned by the United States. Does that not trump that concern? Because it basically says that the secretary, even if the secretary says they don't think it's consistent, something's not consistent with our plan, we have the authority to say, so?
No,
it doesn't affect us unless we let it affect us or we agree to affect it.
I mean, I think that's a ground for disagreement. We the city don't have authority under the bill really to do anything. The authority that's being delegated here is to the two boards that are being created and to the secretaries. We, the city, there isn't a process for the city to say, no, that's not consistent with our plan. No, that's not something that our land use law would permit or prohibit. There isn't a mechanism in here for us to participate in that process and have some explicit authority to make that decision for Monrovia, the way there is in state law, for example. Our remedy, if we believed that a decision of one of the departments or a decision of one of these bodies was in conflict with one of our land use plans, would essentially be, I guess, to sue in federal court. And that seems to be, not something that's a very easy way for Monrovia to assert its positions. I think it would be fairly simple to change the system that's set up here to require a finding by a local government agency, for example, that a proposed action was consistent with a plan, as is the case, for example, in state law. There are obviously requirements that a local agency find that certain things are consistent with the general plan or those kinds of things. I think it would be easy enough to do that under this kind of a scheme. It just doesn't do it now. It's sort of a you'll have to trust us kind of a system.
Well,
And
except
that's-
that there are several points in here, and I mean, I could go through and read, the sections
I
for
agree
you.
with you.
But that they say over and over again that it does not affect the landowner. The landowner is not required. The landowner is nothing creates a liability for the landowner. Nothing, basically it says throughout the document that that the landowner trumps the NRA. Should, for example, let's say the NRA says they want to do a program to eradicate all sequoia trees or something and we say, no, thank you. Our wilderness preserve area, and our Monrovia lands, we don't want to do that. That's how I read this. We have the opt-out. We have the opportunity to either to not accept it or to opt, or rather we could say, yes, please do that in our area. That's more of an opt-in.
I think if the bill said that the last part, the opt-in, the opt-out part, I think from at least the perspective of my office, that would be something that would be a step in the positive direction. Right now, there isn't that opt-in, opt-out, make a finding. There isn't any role whatsoever for the city as a city to make a formal sort of finding or decision about issues like that. I agree with you. There are plenty of places in the statute, in the bill, that say we're going to require the landowner to do this, or we're not going to do something that's inconsistent. My point is that the same people who are supposed to not do those things get to decide whether or not they're doing them or not doing them, or they're consistent or not consistent. There's no formal role for the city as a government entity with interests in the proposed NRA to provide input into those decisions. And that's the point we're trying to make in the comment letter. Even something as simple as what are the boundaries, one of the points we raised in the comments, there's a map that gets filed, but there's no comment period on the map. We don't even have the entitlement to see the map as the bill reads now until after it's filed. So there could be a process of seeking input, of allowing local government entities to have some say. I think the intent is that these advisory boards are something moving in that direction. But again, there's no specific role for the city of Monrovia. There's no specific role for local government landowners on either one of those bodies. So the point we were raising in our comment letter is that there should be a more formal process for a government entity, a partner in this process, to make the kinds of decisions that the bill seems to say should be made. Is that clear?
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I think we can.
I would like to make one correction. We did receive this afternoon, actually, an updated map that I believe the city clerk has distributed to the council.
No?
May not. No. I can print it right now for you.
Oh.
I know I asked at Congresswoman Chu's representative at the chamber meeting a couple of weeks ago for a more detailed map that would show parcel by parcel
I
who's
apologize,
impacted.
we did get one.
And we were told that would not be available. But Craig, I do have a question. So right now, we have 100% control over the wilderness preserve? The city of Monrovia does?
As to those things that a city can legislate, yes. Right.
And what do you think our percentage of control would be under the National Recreation Area?
I couldn't put a number on it. Less, but I couldn't put a number on it.
Less than 100%?
I just don't.
Okay, thank you.